Things got crazy. Dusty May chose Michigan. Louisville needs to pivot. We'll identify who Louisville might turn to now in the coaching search on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. The Louisville basketball coaching search has already been hectic, and on Saturday evening, it got crazier. Dusty May chose Michigan, and now Louisville has to pivot. We'll identify who the Cardinals might pivot to, but also explain why time is of the essence and it is the enemy of the Cardinals at the moment. Saturday was wild. All weekend since Florida Atlantic lost in the NCAA tournament, all signs pointed to Dusty May being the next head coach of the Louisville Cardinals. Many insiders have since come out after Dusty May chose Michigan and said, yeah, this seemed like it was 100% a done deal. Personally, I had heard from multiple people that it was just a matter of when, and it was expected, almost confirmed, that May was going to be the head coach, announced Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest. Now, I mentioned on Friday's episode that technically, it's not a done deal yet, and things happen in coaching searches at the 11th hour, and it can throw a wrench in the plans. And unfortunately, that is exactly what happened here. Many people thought that May to Louisville was a done deal. Those close to May thought it was a done deal, and Michigan went to the now former Florida Atlantic head basketball coach and made an offer that he couldn't refuse, and he ended up choosing the Michigan Wolverines. So it's unfortunate for Louisville fans. No real way to slice it. It's one of those things you just really have to deal with and say, okay, and move on. Now, what we're going to talk about in the next segment is one reason why people are so concerned is that we don't really know where Louisville is going to pivot to now. But we're going to hold that off here for just a couple minutes and continue to talk about, well, why did Dusty May choose Michigan over Louisville? For starters, it's not a better job. Let's get that out of the way. The Michigan job is not a better job. Michigan is not a better program. It's not. But there are a couple reasons I feel like might have been why May wanted to go up to Ann Arbor. Number one, he is from Peoria, Illinois. He's got that Big Ten background. Early in the coaching search, he was rumored to be the heavy favorite for the Ohio State job. He wanted that job. It's a Big Ten job. So it would make sense as to why he would want the Michigan job as well. There is some stability at the moment with the Big Ten Conference along with the SEC. And it hurts Louisville. It hurts Louisville in all sports. Being in the ACC at the moment, there is a lack of stability. So could it be that May looked at this job, both jobs, side by side, and valued the conference stability that Michigan had and sort of winced at the lack of stability that was in the ACC? That is definitely something of consideration. Personally, for me, I feel like it was probably for a multitude of different reasons. When May was asked why he ended up choosing Michigan, he said something along the lines of boosters and donors and backing of the alumni and NIL. And, I mean, you can read that for what it is. It feels like a very generic answer. Now, it's probably true. Michigan does have a very solid backing from alumni. They've got good NIL. But then again, so does Louisville. So I don't really put too much stock into that. It probably came down to a couple different things. Number one, Big Ten background would make sense. Number two, the stability of the conferences also comes into play here. Number three, we have seen a couple different numbers being thrown out there in terms of possible contract, but if Louisville had a set amount that they were looking at for May and didn't really want to go much higher, and Michigan comes in and absolutely blows the doors off of the offer and puts a new one out there that May can't refuse, and her doesn't feel confident matching that, then that's one reason. I think some of it might have to do with the spotlight as well. And this was brought up in the Twitter spaces last night. I'd seen rumblings over the past month or so. Now, I can't really point back to where I saw them because it was just, passing by, scrolling on Twitter. But multiple people had, I won't say reported, but claimed that Dusty May wasn't a fan of the huge spotlight. And that, he wants to go to a place where, the spotlight is not so bright. Now, Ohio State and Michigan are both football schools. The expectations are, maybe pretty close to each other as it relates to Louisville, but you don't essentially have to win a lot right away like you would at Louisville. Probably would, but not to the point where Louisville is a basketball school. It's a basketball town. There is a ton of pressure on the next head coach because of the expectations at hand, and the pressure at places like Michigan and Ohio State aren't as high key as it would be at Louisville. That's just another maybe idea or a reason why he chose him. Personally, I don't know essentially why May did what he did. Clutch came in, helped Michigan out. It just feels like it's because of a multitude of different reasons. So for me, it sucks. It really does. It unfortunately makes sense to me because it sort of matches up and checks out with what we've heard about Dusty May in terms of the spotlight and stuff like that. But regardless, May's not going to be the next head coach. And for Louisville fans, that's a very tough pill to swallow. We're already exhausted with this coaching search, and now it takes a turn for the worse. And you've got to basically go back to the drawing board, so to speak. And it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. And I listened to Louisville fans last night on my Twitter space pour out their emotions, and you could just see the passion and the overall anger and disappointment in this, and just people are just exhausted. So I will say before we talk about some new candidates, that Dusty May was not a grand slam type hire. I was able to convince myself mentally that he was going to be a solid option for Louisville because of his offensive coaching style, because of his player development and scouting. But there were real concerns as to whether or not he could handle the pressure of this job, whether he could recruit at Louisville, what his defense looked like, whether he was a flash in the pan type coach. I think that Dusty May is a good coach. Don't get me wrong. But he wasn't the grand slam like a Scott Drew would have been. So losing out on Dusty May, I don't think it's the end of the world. And truthfully, I feel like that's not why a good amount of the fan base is concerned. The good amount of the fan base is concerned because we couldn't answer the question, if not Dusty, then who? We're going to try to identify a couple of candidates that Louisville might turn to now that Dusty May is off the table. And I'll be honest with Card Nation here. They are not names that are going to spark a ton of excitement right away. We'll talk about who those coaches are here momentarily after we tell you about our friends over at Nissan. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The Arizona Wildcats can only be described as an Armada. This two-seed is as hardcore as it gets out there, so it's no wonder they took it to Long Beach State in the first round of the tournament and to Dayton in the second round. They were the first team to punch their ticket to the Sweet 16, and they will be looking to clinch a Final Four berth at the conclusion of next weekend. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. While we're here, also want to take this time to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament, whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed. It's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. New customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I have a 5-day streak of winning college basketball parlay bets, and it's incredible. You get a 50% profit boost right now, which is absolutely wild. So do yourself a favor, visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Cardinal fans, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. A free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the big stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your teams every day. Who does Louisville turn to now? That's one of the main concerns with how close to chest this search has been for athletic director Josh Hurd, is that it seemed like all signs were pointing to Dusty May, and according to multiple insiders, that was indeed the case. It was expected for May to become the next head coach of Louisville. But now, with Scott Drew off the table, with Dusty May off the table, where do you turn? And that is a question that is really, really driving Louisville fans crazy. I'm going to introduce 4 names that have started to get talked about more and more over the past 12 hours or so. And I'll be honest with you, if you were a person that was not excited about Dusty May, or if you were someone that it took a while, that you had to do some mental gymnastics to convince yourself that May was the guy, that May was the way, these names aren't going to be exciting for you, because you would have to basically do the same thing, and the resumes aren't as good as Dusty May's outside of one. We'll start with the one. That is Buzz Williams. And he's sort of getting the same reaction that a Mick Cronin hire would get, is that, sure, he might have a high floor, but really hasn't done much in the tournament. Now, tournament success is a virtue. You don't have many candidates with sustained tournament success. Buzz Williams coached, what was it, like 7 seasons at Marquette, if I'm not mistaken. 6 seasons at Marquette, made 2 Sweet 16s and an Elite 8. Ended up going to Virginia Tech. In 5 seasons there, he made 1 Sweet 16, and then has been with Texas A&M since 2019-2020. Made 2 NCAA tournaments, and at this point, this episode is being recorded before Texas A&M plays in that round of 32 game against Houston later on Sunday, but has not made a Final Four in his career. He is 51 years old. I don't think he would leave Texas A&M. He's from Greenville, Texas, and if you're trying to compete monetarily with Texas A&M, you're probably going to lose 10 times out of 10. But he's a coach that, sort of like Mick Cronin, has a higher floor, but the ceiling seems to be a little bit lower. Had some really good teams at Marquette, but in his coaching career, pretty close to over 15 years, he's only had 3 seasons in which he has had single-digit losses. He's never had a season under 8 losses in any year of his career. So Buzz Williams, you could certainly do worse, but he's not going to be a name that draws a ton of excitement. Moving on to some of the mid-major coaches, the main name that has been talked about is Shaheen Holloway. He was the architect behind the St. Peter's upset over Kentucky in 2022 in the run that saw the Peacocks making it to the Elite 8. That was in his 4th season with St. Peter's. Since then, he took a job at his alma mater, Seton Hall. Went over 500 last year, went to the NIT, but this year, 21-12. Probably should have made it to the NCAA tournament, but it is what it is. He has 1 NCAA tournament to his name. If you were worried about the resume of Dusty May, you're going to worry about the resume of Shaheen Holloway. He is 47 years old, went to Seton Hall. So would he leave Seton Hall for Louisville? That is something that many people aren't really convinced that he would, but I understand St. Peter's, Seton Hall. He's only his second year at Seton Hall. Pretty solid year with pretty solid wins. Offensively speaking, there are some concerns, but he has not had one season of his career in which he has had single-digit losses. So if Holloway is the coach that Louisville goes to, you're not going to see a lot of the fan base, at least at the moment, be pretty excited about it. Moving on, Pat Kelsey coaches the College of Charleston, 48 years old. He's from Cincinnati, from the Chris Mack coaching tree, was an assistant head coach for Xavier in his career before he took over as the head coach of Winthrop. Made a couple of NCAA tournaments with the Eagles in the Big South Conference, had 3 seasons with under 10 losses. He took over the Charleston job in 2021, went 17-15 the first year, but since then, 31-4 last season and 27-8 this season. Lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament both seasons. So he has pretty close to I think it's like a .700 winning percentage. So he's winning at places that are pretty lowly rated, but not going to be a ton of excitement because he hasn't made a huge tournament run. His teams are just good enough to get to the tournament, but seemingly not much more after that. He is one of the better mid-major coaches in the country. But again, you could be a great coach, but also not a great fit for this job. And if Josh Hurt is having to go down the list to other mid-major coaches, then a lot of the fan base will not be excited. Another name that's sort of been tossed around is Amir Abdur-Rahim, was the coach that led Kennesaw State to the NCAA tournament last season, 26-9. He took over a program that was not doing all that great, 1-28 in his first year, 2019-2020. Won 5 games the next year, 13 the year following, and then got to 26-9. First year at South Florida this season, and they absolutely had a fantastic year, 25-7, the top seed in the American Athletic, ended up losing in the semifinals and making the NIT. But, man, they were absolutely fantastic this past season, and he turned that team around fairly quickly. South Florida was 14-18 last season, so he's shown that he can utilize the transfer portal, can recruit well, and be a solid X's and O's coach. But all of these coaches, all 4 that we just talked about, would be uninspiring hires. They would be lackluster hires, even as it relates to a coach like Dusty May, who is not a sure thing, but I think that's why a lot of Louisville fans are concerned, is because you hear those 4 names and you're like, man, I was concerned about Dusty May. These are the 4 names we're pivoting to? This is the University of Louisville we're talking about. Hard to blame the fan base for feeling that way. I don't think Mick Cronin is going to be a candidate or a serious candidate. I guess he could, but he's not been a name that's been talked about. I'm not saying that this would happen. I'm just going to post the hypothetical because it's been introduced a couple times. Does losing out on your top 2 candidates change the way Josh Hurt looks at this hire in terms of baggage? What I mean by that is it seems like Will Wade, Chris Beard, some other guys were off the table because of the baggage, heading into this hire. But does losing out on your number 1 option in Scott Drew, does losing out on your number 2 option in Dusty May, does that change the way you look at this? Because you could say no to baggage because of the other candidates that are on the table. Now, with your top candidates off the table, does it make you pivot your guidelines and prerequisites for this hire to where maybe you look at guys like Will Wade or maybe even Chris Beard? I don't think it does, speaking from intuition, but I don't think it is an automatic no. I feel like my gut is telling me that maybe it makes him think twice about the baggage, but I still think that no tolerance policy and the risk of that is going to mean that both of those guys are off the table. But you do wonder, top two guys are off. You have to pivot. If you don't feel good about any of the other candidates, if you think that there is a considerable amount of risk and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to have to take a risk either way. Let's do it with a coach that can win us ball games. I don't know. I'm just posing the hypothetical here because right now it seems like Louisville is back to the drawing board and we are completely erasing what happened the past couple of weeks and we're starting over. But one thing is non-negotiable. That is the notion that time is of the essence. It is not a friend of the Cardinals program right now. I'm going to explain why here in just a moment after I tell you about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It's not just another job board. It has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy that, in fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Time is of the essence with this hire. It is not a friend at the moment of the Louisville Cardinals basketball program. The Cardinals, when FAU lost, the Cardinals got put on the clock. All signs point into a hire being made Monday, potentially Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest. How does the time frame change now? I think it does get delayed. And unfortunately for Josh Hurd, you are in the time frame in which you need to make a hire. I'm not saying you have to rush and hire somebody tomorrow, but you can't really wait a good amount of time either unless you're going after a coach that's still in the NCAA tournament when the Sweet 16 comes around. But you do have to make this hire in a timely manner because the transfer portal opened up last Monday. Top players are joining the portal. A good amount of teams, their season has ended. More players will be entering the portal. Louisville will likely have to flip pretty much the entire roster from last season. You might bring back 3, 4, maybe even 5 guys, but you're going to have to bring in the majority of the roster. And it's critical that you bring the new coach in with ample time to get his team in place, because if you don't, you are essentially chalking up next year as a loss. And I think Josh Hurd pretty much knows that. Like I said, I think caught pretty off guard with this Dusty May to Michigan ordeal. These next 24 hours with this podcast being released at about, 11:30 noon on Sunday, these next 24 to 48 hours are going to be critical, not only for this next year's team, but for this program as a whole. This hire becomes even more important now. No Scott Drew, no Dusty May. There's no other really solid coaches out there, name brand wise, that it feels like Louisville can pivot to. Now, there's some that believe Hurd is going to make a power move. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know who you would even go after if a certain coach or coaches have already been crossed off the list, if they've already gotten extensions at their previous destination. I mean, it's this. I do not envy Josh Hurd for this decision. This is a legacy-defining hire. This is a decision in which Josh Hurd will earn his money because he is being tasked with a very, very tough decision. And the timing aspect of this makes it even more drastic. It's tough because not only do you have to pivot and make sure that you find the right candidate, but you got to do it quick. You have to do it quick. There are some that say, well, Louisville can wait and hire someone next week. If these coaches aren't coaching now, waiting until next week is going to be tough. Waiting until next week is going to be very tough. So, personally, for me, I think the timeline has to say somewhat the same here. I think you have to make a hire this upcoming week. And they'll say, well, you can't rush this. I get it. But Louisville's not in a position to where you can wait either. So you have to understand that the timing of this it's not ideal. Louisville is in a bad situation right now with the timing aspect. The only thing you can hope for at this point is that Josh Hurd has a couple guys in his mind that he is ready to kickstart this search into high gear and have conversations with a short list of those guys, narrow that list down, pick a guy that you feel like can best lead this program to where it needs to be, and go get that set guy and do it pretty quickly to where you're announcing a hire this week. That's the ideal time frame, because the longer you wait to make this hire, the more likely of a chance that Louisville is going to have issues filling out the roster with the quality players that the Cardinals program need, because players are already entering the portal. We're going to see a spike in player entries over this next week, I believe, with 64 teams or 68 teams getting cut down to 16. All the other teams, you're going to have your exit interviews. You're going to have players enter the portal. This is the week where I felt like last week it is what it was, or it was what it was, I should say. You still have the tournament, and players went after the tournament, or after the tournament starts. Now, it's critical. So I'm sorry, I don't think that you can wait here. And I understand you want to pick the right guy, and so do I, but you don't have the luxury of being able to wait here. And it's fairly clear, and I think that's why a lot of people are concerned, is not only are you having to pivot to another quality candidate, which a lot of people don't even know who that is, you're having to do it very, very quickly on the fly because of the timing of where things are now. So it is what it is. These next 48 hours are going to be critical. I'm interested to see where Josh Hurd turns. I'm interested to see what the time frame looks like when things start to leak and to go from there. But at this point, I don't blame Cardinal fans for being concerned. The head coach was there until he wasn't. So we'll continue to cover this roller coaster of a coaching search tomorrow. That'll wrap up today's episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here on Monday.